What's up, everybody? Willkommen and bienvenue to Cabaret. Just kidding. It's Brother Bedtime. Hi. Let's see. How do we look today? Not bad. I hope the lag is cleared up for all you fine folks out there, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. We had a pretty sunny one here in Edmonton today. It was nice. I went for a brief little walk. We had some groceries delivered, business meeting, life. A bunch of things happened to and around me, and I can only imagine the same for you. I can only imagine that. I can't imagine anything else. Let's see. Today we are continuing on through the Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. And today, being Thursday, we're gonna take a little bit of extra time. We're probably gonna read two chapters, unless I spend more time than usual conjecturing wildly about what was going on in the author's mind. This evening's refreshment is a Sorceress Sour, a lime kettle sour from New Level Brewing. I've never heard of them before, but I'm a sucker for a cool can. There she is. And yeah, so that's that. Happy Thursday, everybody. Here's to you. Vraiment délicieux. How was your day? How's the sour? It's really nice. It's actually it's got coriander in it to boot, but it's a lime kettle sour, so it's sort of the classic citrusy flavor, but the coriander gives it a nice little edge. Molto bene. I would recommend it. Um, I got it in a 4 pack from the shop by the Safeway on 109. If anyone if anyone wants to go hunting for it. Uh, in yesterday's episode, we landed on a strange new island. The chapter was called The Three Sleepers, and this particular island seemed to have some very powerful magic at play. They came across a feast table laden with all sorts of victuals and nourishment. And at the table were three sleeping men who had been there, we later learned, for about 7 years. Their hair had grown out, and our adventuring companions were unable to rouse them from their slumber. In the middle of the night, however, some of our protagonists decided to stay aboard this, or stay on this strange island, and take in the roomy and unpurged air of the night and see just what the heck was going on. And it was a good thing they did, because in the dead of night, a strange bare-armed woman came out of a hill. There was a doorway in a hill nearby, and she approached and informed them that this table is meant to feed those that get this far, that sail this far east. The food is not cursed after all, and thank goodness for that. Reepicheep was the first to take a bite and toast the good lady, but it seems that these three sleepers are indeed the remaining three lords, Mavramorn. Oh my gosh, I can only remember Mavramorn. Well, they're the three final lords that the whole reason they set out on this journey was to find their missing lords, and they've done so now. And in order to break the enchantment, they're going to find out how to break the enchantment. The girl's father is going to approach, presumably them, and inform them. So I hope you're chilling out. I hope you're having a great night. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 14. The beginning of the end of the world. The beginning of the end of the world. Slowly the door opened again, and out there came a figure as tall and straight as the girl's, but not so slender. It carried no light, but light seemed to come from it. As it came nearer, Lucy saw that it was like an old man. His silver beard came down to his bare feet in front, and his silver hair hung down to his heels behind his robe, and appeared to be made from the fleece of silver sheep. He looked so mild and grave that once more all the travelers rose to their feet and stood in silence. But the old man came on without speaking to the travelers, and took on the other side of the table opposite to his daughter. Stood on the other side of the table opposite to his daughter. Then both of them held up their arms before them and turned to face the east. In that position, they began to sing. I wish I could write down the song, but no one was present who could remember it. No one who was present could remember it. Wait, does that mean that... Is that like a conceit then that C.S. Lewis had this whole story dictated to him by the characters at some point? What? Because if nobody there could remember it to tell him about it, more conjecture, more wild conjecture. Lucy said afterward that it was high, almost shrill, but very beautiful. A cold kind of song, an early morning kind of song. And as they sang, the gray clouds lifted from the eastern sky, and the white patches grew bigger and bigger, till it was all white, and the sea began to shine like silver. And long afterward, but those two sang all the time, the east began to turn red, and at last, unclouded, the sun came up out of the sea, and its long level ray shot down the length of the table on the gold and silver and on the stone knife. I'm getting some serious Zoroastrianism vibes from these guys, singing to the sun over the ocean. I'm super jolly about the sour. Yeah, it's a... Wow. Here's to you, Lance. Oh. Tasty, tasty. Once or twice before, the Narnians had wondered whether the sun at its rising did not look bigger in these seas than it had looked at home. This time they were certain. There was no mistaking it, and the brightness of its ray on the dew and on the table was far beyond any morning brightness they had ever seen. And as Edmund said afterward, though lots of things happened on that trip which sound more exciting, that moment was really the most exciting. For now they knew that they had truly come to the beginning of the end of the world. Then something seemed to be flying at them out of the very center of the sun. But of course one couldn't look in that direction steadily to make sure. But presently the air became full of voices. Voices which took up the same song that the lady and her father were singing, but in far wilder tones, and in a language which no one knew. And soon after that, the owners of these voices could be seen. They were birds, large and white, and they came by hundreds and thousands, and lighted on everything, on the grass and the pavement, on the stone table, on your shoulders, your hands, and your head, till it looked as if heavy snow had fallen. For, like snow, they not only made everything white, but blurred and blunted all shapes. But Lucy, looking out from between the wings of the birds that covered her, saw one bird fly to the old man with something in its beak that looked like a little fruit, unless it was a little live coal, which it might have been, for it was too bright to look at. And the bird laid it in the old man's mouth. Made it. Mulric, welcome. We've just seen the strange lady and her aged father sing to the sun, and now a flock of thousands of singing birds have joined them and landed on everything, and they've just put some bright object, possibly fruit, possibly a live coal, into the old man's mouth. There's some serious world building going on here. Then the birds stopped their singing and appeared to be very busy about the table. When they rose from it again, everything on the table that could be eaten or drunk had disappeared. These birds rose from their meal in their thousands and hundreds and carried away all the things that could not be eaten or drunk, such as bones, rinds, shells, and took their flight back to the rising sun. But now, because they were not singing, The whir of their wings seemed to set the whole air a-tremble. And there was the table pecked clean and empty, and the 3 old lords of Narnia still fast asleep. Here we can see Pauline Bain's rendition of the old man, who I must say is a very handsome and well-outfitted chap. And he's about to get the mama bird treatment. Looking good, old beardy guy. I don't know his name yet. Now, at last, the old man turned to the travelers and bade them welcome. "Sir," said Caspian, "will you tell us how to undo the enchantment which holds these 3 Narnian lords asleep?" "I will gladly tell you that, my son," said the old man. "To break this enchantment, you must sail to the world's end, or as near as you can come to it, and you must come back having left at least one of your company behind." "And what must happen to that one?" asked Reepicheep. "He must go on into the utter east, and never return into the world." "That is my heart's desire," said Reepicheep. "And are we near the world's end now, sir?" asked Caspian. "Have you any knowledge of the seas and lands further east than this?" "I saw them long ago," said the old man, "but it was from a great height. I cannot tell you such things as sailors need to know." "Do you mean you were flying in the air?" Eustace blurted out. "I was a long way above the air, my son," replied the old man. "I am Ramandu, but I see that you stare at one another and have not heard this name, and no wonder, for the days when I was a star had ceased long before any of you knew this world, and all the constellations have changed." "Golly," said Edmund under his breath, "he's a retired star." I hope that one day I get to call myself a retired star. "Aren't you a star any longer?" asked Lucy. "I am a star at rest, my daughter," answered Ramandu. "When I set for the last time, decrepit and old beyond all that you can reckon, I was carried to this island. I am not so old now as I was then. Every morning a bird brings me a fireberry from the valleys in the sun, and each fireberry takes away a little of my age. And when I have become as young as the child that was born yesterday, then I shall take my rising again, for we are at the earth's eastern rim, and once more tread the great dance." "In our world," said Eustace, "a star is a huge ball of flaming gas." Oh my God, Eustace. Where's your romanticism, Eustace? "Even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. And in this world you have already met a star, for I think you have been with Coriakin." "Is he a retired star too?" said Lucy. "Well, not quite the same," said Ramandu. "It was not quite at rest that he was set to govern the Duffers. You might call it a punishment. He might have shone for many thousands of years more in the southern winter sky, if all had gone well." "What did he do, sir?" asked Caspian. "My son," said Ramandu, "it is not for you, a son of Adam, to know what faults a star can commit. But come, we waste time in such talk. Are you yet resolved? Will you sail further east and come again, leaving one to return no more, and so break the enchantment? Or will you sail westward?" "Surely, sire," said Reepicheep, "there is no question about that. It is very plainly part of our quest to rescue these 3 lords from enchantment." "I think the same, Reepicheep," replied Caspian. And even if it were not so, it would break my heart not to go as near the world's end as the Dawn Treader will take us. But I am thinking of the crew. They signed on to seek the Seven Lords, not to reach the rim of the earth. If we sail east from here, we sail to find the edge, the utter east. And no one knows how far it is. They're brave fellows, but I see signs that some of them are weary of the voyage and long to have our prow pointing to Narnia again. I don't think I should take them further without their knowledge and consent. God, I love knowledge and consent. And then there's poor Lord Roop. He's a broken man. My son, said the star, it would be no use, even though you wished it, to sail for the world's end with men unwilling or men deceived. That is not how great enchantments are achieved. Great unenchantments are achieved. Maddie says hi. Oh my God, Gray in the chat. Welcome, little dude. I hope you're having a good day. Always nice to see you. This is cool. I'm really digging this. They must know where they go and why. But who is this broken man you speak of? Caspian told Ramandu the story of Roop. I can give him what he needs most, said Ramandu. In this island there is sleep without stint or measure, and sleep in which no faintest footfall of a dream was ever heard. Let him sit beside these other three and drink oblivion till your return. Oh, the poetry of this guy, Ramandu. He's after my heart. Drink oblivion. Don't mind if I do. Oh, let's do that, Caspian, said Lucy. I'm sure it's just what he would love. At that moment, they were interrupted by the sound of many feet and voices. Drinian and the rest of the ship's company were approaching. They halted in surprise when they saw Ramandu and his daughter, and then, because these were obviously great people, every man uncovered his head. Some sailors eyed the empty dishes and flagons on the table with eyes filled with regret. My lord, said the king to Drinian. Nope. My lord, said the king to Drinian, pray send 2 men back to the Dawn Treader with a message to Lord Roop. Tell him that the last of his old shipmates are here, asleep without dreams, and that he can share it. When this had been done, Caspian told the rest to sit down and laid the whole situation before them. When he had finished, there was a long silence and some whispering until presently the master bowman got to his feet and said, What some of us have been wanting to ask for a long time, your majesty, is how we're ever to get home when we do turn, whether we turn here or somewhere else. It's been west and northwest winds all the way, barring an occasional calm. And if that doesn't change, I'd like to know what hopes we have of seeing Narnia again. There's not much chance of supplies lasting while we row all that way. That's landsman talk, said Drinian. There's always a prevailing west wind in these seas all through the late summer, and it always changes after the new year. We'll have plenty of wind for sailing westward, more than we shall like from all accounts. That's true, said an old sailor who was a Galmian by birth. You get some ugly weather rolling up from the east in January and February, and by your leave, sire, if I was in command of this ship, I'd say to winter here and begin the voyage home in March. What did you eat while you were wintering here? What did you eat while you were wintering here? Asked Eustace. This table, said Ramandu, will be filled with the king's feast every day at sunset. Now you're talking, said several sailors. Your majesties and gentlemen and ladies all, said Rheinelf, there's just one thing I want to say. There's not one of us chaps as was pressed on this journey. We're volunteers. And there's some here that are looking very hard at that table and thinking about king's feasts who were talking very loud about adventures on the day we sailed from Cair Paravel, and swearing they wouldn't come home till we'd found the end of the world. And there were some standing on that quay. Quay? Quay. Who would have given all they had to come with us. It was thought a finer thing than to have a cabin boy's berth on the Dawn Treader than to wear a knight's belt. I don't know if you get the hang of what I'm saying, but what I mean is that I think chaps who set out like us will look as silly as those duffel-puds if we come home and say we got to the beginning of the world's end and hadn't the heart to go further. Some of the sailors cheered at this, but some said that that was all very well. "This isn't going to be much fun," whispered Edmund to Caspian. "What are we to do if half those fellows hang back?" "Wait," Caspian whispered back. "I've still a card to play." "Aren't you going to say anything, Reep?" whispered Lucy. "No. Why should your majesty expect it?" answered Reepicheep in a voice that most people heard. "My own plans are made. While I can, I sail east in the Dawn Treader. When that fails me, I paddle east in my coracle. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my 4 paws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country, or shot over the edge of the world in some vast cataract, I shall sink with my nose to the sunrise, and Peepaseek will be head of talking mice in Narnia." "Hear, hear," said a sailor. "I'll say the same, barring the bit about the coracle, which wouldn't bear me," he added in a lower voice. "I'm not going to be outdone by a mouse." Bravado and braggadocio, the male ego, win out in the end. At this point, Caspian jumped to his feet. "Friends," he said, "I think you have not quite understood our purpose. You talk as if we had come to you with our hat in our hand, begging for shipmates. It isn't like that at all. We and our royal brother and sister, and their kinsman and Sir Reepicheep the good knight, and the Lord Drinian, have an errand to the world's edge. It is our pleasure to choose from among you such as are worthy and willing. Let me try that one again. It is our pleasure to choose from such of you. Oh, it's a tricky one. It is our pleasure to choose from among such of you as are willing those whom we deem worthy of so high an enterprise. Wow! Articles all over the place in that sentence. We have not said that any man can come for the asking. That is why we shall now command the Lord Drinian and Master Rince to consider carefully what men among you are the hardest in battle, the most skilled seamen, the purest in blood, the most loyal to our person, and the cleanest of life and manners, and to give their names to us in a schedule." He paused and went on in a quicker voice. "Aslan's mane!" he exclaimed. "Do you think that the privilege of seeing the last things is to be bought for a song? Why, every man that comes with us shall bequeath the title of Dawn Treader to all his descendants. And when we land at Cair Paravel on the homeward voyage, he shall have either gold or land enough to make him rich all his life. Now, scatter over the island, all of you. In half an hour's time I shall receive the names that Lord Drinian brings me." There was a rather sheepish silence, and then the crew made their bows and moved away, one in this direction and one in that, but mostly in little knots or bunches, talking. "And now for the Lord Roop," said Caspian. But turning to the head of the table, he saw that Roop was already there. He had arrived, silent and unnoticed, while the discussion was going on, and was seated beside the Lord Argos. The daughter of Ramandu stood beside him as if she had just helped him into his chair. Ramandu stood behind him and laid both his hands on Roop's grey head. Even in daylight, a faint silver light came from the hands of the star. There was a smile on Roop's haggard face. He held out one of his hands to Lucy and the other to Caspian. For a moment it looked as if he were going to say something. Then his smile brightened as if he were feeling some delicious sensation. A long sigh of contentment came from his lips. His head fell forward, and he slept. "Poor Roop," said Lucy. "I am glad. He must have had terrible times." "Don't let's even think of it," said Eustace. "Oh." Oh. Mulric says power move. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you thought we were going to ask you to risk your lives going to the edge of the world? No. No, you wish we would ask you. Oh, Lord Roop, a good night's sleep will do him good. Meanwhile, Caspian's speech, helped perhaps by some magic of the island, was having just the effect he intended. A good many who had been anxious enough to get out of the voyage felt quite differently about being left out of it. And of course, whenever any one sailor announced that he had made up his mind to ask for permission to sail, the ones who hadn't said this felt they were getting fewer and more uncomfortable. So that before the harbor, the half hour was nearly over, several people were positively sucking up to Drinian and Rince, at least that's what they called it at my school, to get a good report. And soon there were only 3 left who didn't want to go, and those 3 were trying very hard to persuade others to stay with them. And very shortly after that, there was only 1 left. And in the end, he began to be afraid of being left behind all on his own and changed his mind. At the end of the half hour, they all came trooping back to Aslan's table and stood at one end while Drinian and Rince went and sat down with Caspian and made their report. And Caspian accepted all the men but that one who had changed his mind at the last moment. His name was Pittencream, and he stayed on the island of the Star all the time the others were away looking for the world's end, and he very much wished he had gone with them. He wasn't the sort of man who could enjoy talking to Ramandu and Ramandu's daughter, nor they to him, and it rained a good deal, and though there was a wonderful feast on the table every night, he didn't enjoy it very much. He said it gave him the creeps, sitting there alone, and in the rain as likely as not, with those 4 lords asleep at the end of the table. And when the others returned, he felt so out of things that he deserted on the voyage home at the Lone Islands, and went and lived in Calormen, where he told wonderful stories about his adventures at the end of the world, until at last he came to believe them himself. So you might say, in a sense, that he lived happily ever after. But he could never bear mice. That night, they all ate and drank together at the great table between the pillars where the feast was magically renewed. And next morning, the Dawn Treader set sail once more, just when the great birds had come and gone. "Lady," said Caspian, "I hope to speak with you again when I have broken the enchantments." And Ramandu's daughter looked at him and smiled. "Ha ha ha, Caspian, you old dog." Here we can see the young king courting a magical woman, the daughter of a star. I think they'd make a good couple. That's the end of chapter 14. So, take a little break here between the chapters just to talk out loud for a moment, as I'm wont to do. This notion of the stars being people and of being under the jurisdiction of Aslan kind of plays into the cosmological or the theological parallels between what we would call heavenly bodies, the stars being governed in their spheres and having their motions ordered by some sort of celestial or heavenly power is really common in a lot of mythologies and religious traditions. The Greeks, not the least of which. Plato wrote a very strange and unfinished book called the Timaeus, where he talks about the harmony of the spheres, the music of the heavens, and basically uses musical theory to describe the motions of the planets and the stars. those fixed bodies. Similarly, in Christian mythology, you've got the most famous is Lucifer Morningstar, who was the fallen angel that attempted an unsuccessful coup in heaven and was cast down to earth. So this notion of stars or heavenly bodies disobeying their the harmony of the spheres or whatever is something that is very deeply ingrained in a lot of archetypal and symbolic history. And I find it deadly fascinating. There's actually the sailors, the great captains of the Polynesian empire. Empire is the wrong word for it. The explorers that set out from what we would now call Malaysia and Indonesia and ended up populating Polynesia and Hawaii and the islands between the islands of the Pacific Ocean, basically. The knowledge of how to navigate by reading the stars was considered sacred. It was a holy and very closely guarded secret, how to navigate by the night sky, and that's why the priests and the captains were one and the same in that culture. And when they landed, they then became the leaders of the settlements and what have you. Yeah, it's astounding. The things that people used to just have to hold in their minds and learn and apprehend in order to further the exploits of civilization. Yeah, that's some cool stuff. Oh man, I've always wanted to go sailing, but I would need a GPS for sure. Any other thoughts out there from you folks about this Ramandu, the fallen star, and the parallels or lack thereof? Any interesting jump out from you? Please hop in the chat and say what's up in your fantastic brains. Stunned silence is also an acceptable response to the ravings of a weirdo beardo. Well, I suppose then we will carry on with chapter 15, The Wonders of the Last Sea. Oh, hold on a sec, says Lance. All right. Yeah, let's take a little bit of a breather. Now's a great chance to top up your water or stretch your legs or whatever. We are going to be reading another chapter yet. Cobbling a query. Ooh, I like the phrasing. Yeah, we are going to be reading one more chapter, and as I mentioned earlier, I believe this is the penultimate chapter. So next Monday we will round out. Is there one more after that? Maybe question period at the top of the break to give folks time to type. That's a great idea, Sam. I should just say question period, and then people will know that I won't be immediately sticking my nose back in the book. Question period. That was an old improv game that I used to play when I was in Rapid Fire. At any point, the audience could yell out question period, and the actors would break the scene, address the audience member who could ask them a question. And it could be something about the scene or something totally irrelevant, and it was really fun. What a fun forum for people to voice their curiosities and play. And I guess this is kind of the same thing, you know? You guys can ask questions whenever you want. Lucifer's quite the lad to suggest for paralleling. Yeah, I mean, it's Yeah, I think that he's probably got more in common with our strange star Karayakin, the one that Aslan has set as some variety of punishment. Um, there's all sorts of ancient alien theories or whatever out there about how Lucifer and his fallen angels were those who came to Earth and gave us the gifts of bronze making and sort of uplifted the whole human race with their questionable and powerful knowledge. You can see lots of different parallels between the ancient ruins of societies that couldn't possibly have been in contact with one another several thousand years ago. It's compelling stuff, but you got to be careful because it's a very deep rabbit hole, and it's easy to get misled, I suppose. Aaron Shea says, seems like British authors bounced a lot of themes amongst each other. Gavin with Stardust and Wyn Jones had some kind of living stars in Howl's Moving Castle. Cool. Yeah, I think I remember that. Even your boy J.R.R. Tolkien, he had the Astari, of which Gandalf was one, and they are effectively angels. It's this sort of I think it's called the Astari, which is presumably an allusion also to the ancient goddess Ishtar. But yeah, the equation with celestial beings and literal entities and intelligences from the heavens with the motions of the planets and the heavenly bodies has been a long-standing one. And that makes sense because, when we look up, we see something that is so decidedly beyond our reach and appears to be governed by some immutable harmony and order, that if you observe this, you can see these patterns playing out, and you can learn a lot about the world that way. And a lot of people did for a very long time. But now we have Instagram, so there's actually some really cool programs and apps that you can get for smartphone. If you point it at the night sky, it'll tell you what constellations are and different facts about the movements of the stars and planets. It's pretty wild stuff. Kenan Lance says, actually it was Azazel who was supposedly gave the gift of humans, the gift of fire and jewelry. He was a fallen angel who was too smooth for Lucifer's crew and got kicked out on his own steam. Brilliant. Yeah, if you're interested in some like really wild apocryphal texts, I really recommend the Book of Enoch, which basically details all of this, how the rebellion went, and what happened when they came down to Earth. The Bible calls these figures Nephilim or giants, and they are the sons of God that came down and commingled with humanity, and they are referenced as the great men of old. So there's your Hercules, your who else? Your Gilgamesh, these sort of pioneers, presumably other ancient deities as well, Anubis, Ishtar, Thor, etc. Aaron Shea says, I love the word actually. Makes me feel like a Karen. Weirdest thing is going to another part of the world and seeing new stars. Yeah. I mean that actually happened here in the book, right? Because Lucy was saying how she was missing the ship and the leopard, I think, and they're under totally unfamiliar skies. Yeah, I remember going to Mexico and seeing the moon, which usually here its crescent kind of hangs like this, just like full on, rotated 90 degrees. It kind of threw me for a loop. Well, I think that was a pretty good question period. Thanks for your thoughts, everybody. That was fun. God, I love speculative mythology and all of that. One book I'll probably have to track down and read to you folks at some point is The Great Disciples, The Great Apostles. It's by a guy named Edward Charret, and he's got some pretty wild thoughts. It's from the 20s or something. At any rate, shall we return to Narnia? See some more strange stars. Chapter 15. The Wonders of the Last Sea. Very soon after they had left Ramandu's country, they began to feel that they had already sailed beyond the world. All was different. For one thing, they all found that they were needing less sleep. One did not want to go to bed, nor eat much, nor even to talk, except in low voices. Another thing was the light. There was too much of it. The sun, when it came up each morning, looked twice, if not 3 times, its usual size. And every morning, which gave Lucy the strangest feeling of all, the huge white birds, singing their song with human voices in a language no one knew, streamed overhead and vanished astern on their way to their breakfast at Aslan's table. A little later, they came flying back and vanished into the east. "How beautifully clear the water is," said Lucy to herself, as she leaned over the port side early in the afternoon of the second day. And it was. The first thing she noticed was a little black object about the size of a shoe traveling along at the same speed as the ship. For a moment she thought it was something floating on the surface, but then there came floating past a bit of stale bread which the cook had just thrown out of the galley, and the bit of bread looked as if it were going to collide with the black thing, but it didn't. Man, leave it to humans to be like, wow, we're like in this pristine, untouched land that nobody's ever seen before. Better dump some gross, moldy bread into it. Ah, come on, guys. Granted, they are on a boat and they don't have a garbage disposal and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I don't know. At least it's consistent with humanity's behavior. Now Lucy knew she had seen something just like that happening somewhere else. If only she could remember where. She held her hand. Oh, wait, never mind. I missed a sentence. Just like what, Colin? Just like this. Then the black thing suddenly got very much bigger and flicked back to normal size a moment later. Now Lucy knew she had seen something just like that somewhere else. If only she could remember where. She held her hand to her head and screwed up her face and put out her tongue in the effort to remember. At last she did. Of course. It was like what you saw from a train on a bright, sunny day. You saw the black shadow of your own coach running along the fields at the same pace as the train. Then you went into a cutting, and immediately the same shadow flicked close up to you, and you got big racing along the grass of the cutting bank. Then you came out of the cutting, and flick! Once more the black shadows had gone back to its normal size, and was running along the fields. "It's our shadow, the shadow of the Dawn Treader," said Lucy. "Our shadow running along the bottom of the sea. That time when it got bigger it went over a hill. But in that case the water must be clearer than I thought. Good gracious, I must be seeing the bottom of the sea, fathoms and fathoms down." As soon as she had said this, she realized that the great silvery expanse which she had been seeing, without noticing, for some time, was really the sand on the seabed, and that all sorts of darker or brighter patches were not lights and shadows on the surface, but real things on the bottom. At present, for instance, they were passing over a mass of soft purply green with a broad winding strip of pale gray in the middle of it. But now that she knew it was on the bottom, she saw it much better. She could see that bits of the dark stuff were much higher than other bits and were waving gently. "Just like trees in a wind," said Lucy. "And I do believe that's what they are. It's a submarine forest." They passed on above it, and presently the pale streak was joined by another pale streak. "If I was down there, that streak would be just like a road through the wood, and that place where it joins the other would be a crossroads. Oh, I do wish I was. Hello, the forest is coming to an end. And I do believe the streak really was a road. I can see it going on across the open sand. It's a different color, and it's marked out with something at the edges, dotted lines. Perhaps they are stones. And now it's getting wider." But it was not really getting wider. It was getting nearer. She realized this because of the way in which the shadow of the ship came rushing up toward her. And the road, she felt sure it was a road now, began to go in zigzags. Obviously it was climbing up a steep hill. And when she held her head sideways and looked back, she saw what was very like she saw what she saw was very like what you see when you look down a winding road from the top of a hill. She could even see the shafts of sunlight falling through the deep water onto the wooded valley, and, in the extreme distance, everything melting away into a dim greenness. But some places, the sunny ones, she thought, were ultramarine blue. She could not, however, spend much time looking back. What was coming into view in the forward direction was too exciting. The road had apparently now reached the top of the hill and ran straight forward. Little specks were moving to and fro on it. And now something most wonderful, fortunately in full sunlight. She saw seesaws by the seashore. Yo! Little specks of something were moving to and fro on it. And now something most wonderful, fortunately in full sunlight, or as full as it can be when it falls through fathoms of water, flashed into sight. It was knobbly and jagged and of a pearly, or perhaps an ivory color. She was so nearly straight above it that at first she could hardly make out what it was. But everything became plain when she noticed its shadow. The sunlight was falling across Lucy's shoulders, so the shadow of the thing lay stretched out on the sand behind it. And by its shape she clearly saw that it was a shadow of towers and pinnacles, minarets and domes. "Why, it's a city, or a huge castle," said Lucy to herself. "But I wonder why they've built it on top of a high mountain." Long afterward, when she was back in England, and talked all these adventures over with Edmund, they thought of a reason, and I am pretty sure it is the true one. In the sea, the deeper you go, the darker and colder it gets. And it is down there, in the dark and cold, that dangerous things live. The squid, and the sea serpent, and the kraken. The valleys are the wild, unfriendly places. The sea people feel about their valleys as we do about mountains, and we feel about their mountains as we do about our valleys. It is on the heights, or as we would say, in the shallows, that there is warmth and peace. The reckless hunters and brave knights of the sea go down into the depths on quests and adventures, but return home to the heights for rest and peace, courtesy and counsel, the sports, the dances, and the songs. Ah, yes, nothing goes quite so well with courtesy and counsel as the sports. They had passed the city, and the seabed was still rising. It was only a few 100 feet below the ship now. The road had disappeared. They were sailing above an open, park-like country, dotted with little groves of brightly colored vegetation. And then Lucy nearly squealed aloud with excitement. She had seen people. There were between 15 and 20 of them, and all mounted on seahorses. Not the tiny little seahorses which you may have seen in museums, but horses rather bigger than themselves. They must be noble and lordly people, Lucy thought, for she could catch the gleam of gold on some of their foreheads, and streamers of emerald or orange-colored stuff fluttering from their shoulders in the current. Then, "Oh, bother these fish," said Lucy, for a whole shoal of small, fat fish, swimming quite close to the surface, had come between her and the sea people. But though this spoiled her view, it led to the most interesting thing of all. Suddenly, a fierce little fish of a kind she had never seen before came darting up from below, snapped, grabbed, and rapidly sank with one of the fat fish in its mouth. And all the sea people were sitting on their horses, staring up at what had happened. They seemed to be talking and laughing. And before the hunting fish had got back to them with its prey, another of the same kind came up from the sea people. And Lucy was almost certain that one big seaman who sat on his seahorse in the middle of the party had sent it or released it, as if he had been holding it back till then in his hand or on his wrist. "Why, I do declare," said Lucy, "it's a hunting party, or more like a hawking party. Yes, that's it. They ride out with these little fierce fish on their wrists, just as we used to ride out with falcons on our wrists when we were kings and queens at Cair Paravel long ago. And then they fly them, or I suppose I should say swim them, at the others. How... Here is an image of some of the lordly ladies and gentlefolk of the sea splashing about. Aquaman! Yeah, welcome to this evening's edition of Brother Bedtime. Tonight we are reading The Little Mermaid. Aquaman, that's great. She stopped suddenly because the scene was changing. The sea people had noticed the Dawn Treader. The shoal of fish had scattered in every direction. The people themselves were coming up to find out the meaning of this big black thing which had come between them and the sun. And now they were so close to the surface that if they had been in air instead of water, Lucy could have spoken to them. They were men and women both. All wore coronets of some kind, and many had chains of pearls. They wore no other clothes. Their bodies were the color of old ivory, their hair dark purple. The king in the center, no one could mistake him for anything but the king, looked proudly and fiercely into Lucy's face and shook a spear in his hand. His knights did the same. The faces of the ladies were filled with astonishment. Lucy felt sure they had never seen a ship or a human before. And how should they, in seas beyond the world's end, where no ship ever came? "What are you staring at, Lou?" said a voice close beside her. Yeah, share the love, Lou. Heather says she wants to hear The Little Mermaid. That can be arranged. I know there's a few different renditions of it. Maybe we'll do the old Dutch one, which I think is where it comes from. I think it's an old Dutch fairy tale. Lucy had been so absorbed in what she was seeing that she started at the sound. And when she turned, she found that her arm had gone dead from leaning so long on the rail in one position. Drinian and Edmund were beside her. "Look," she said. They both looked, but almost at once Drinian said in a low voice, "Turn round at once, your majesties. That's right, with our backs to the sea. And don't look as if we were talking about anything important." "Why? What's the matter?" said Lucy as she obeyed. "It'll never do for the sailors to see all that. We'll have men falling in love with a sea woman, or falling in love with the undersea country itself and jumping overboard. I've heard of that kind of thing happening before in strange seas. It's always unlucky to see these people." "But we used to know them," said Lucy. "In the old days at Cair Paravel, when my brother Peter was High King. They came to the surface and sang at our coronation." "I think that must have been a different kind, Lou," said Edmund. "They could live in the air as well as underwater. I rather think these can't. By the look of them, they'd have surfaced and started attacking us long ago if they could. They seem very fierce." "At any rate," began Drinian, but at that moment two sounds were heard. One was a plop. The other was a voice from the fighting top shouting, "Man overboard!" Then everyone was busy. Some of the sailors hurried aloft to take in the sail. Others hurried below to get to the oars, and Rince, who was on duty on the poop, began to put the helm hard so as to come round and back to the man who had gone overboard. But by now everyone knew that it wasn't strictly a man. It was Reepicheep. "Drat that mouse," said Drinian. "It's more trouble than all the rest of the ship's company put together. If there's any scrape to be got into, in it will he get. It ought to be put in irons, keel-hauled, marooned, have its whiskers cut off. Can anyone see the little blighter?" Wow, Drinian. Stern words. "Get off my lawn," says the king. Yeah, these are some grade A sea monkeys. All this didn't mean that Drinian really disliked Reepicheep. On the contrary, he liked him very much, and was therefore frightened about him, and being frightened put him in a bad temper. Just as your mother is much angrier with you for running out into the road in front of a car than a stranger would be. No one, of course, was afraid of Reepicheep's drowning, for he was an excellent swimmer, but the three who knew what was going on below the water were afraid of those long, cruel spears in the hands of the sea people. In a few minutes the Dawn Treader had come round, and everyone could see the black blob in the water, which was Reepicheep. He was chattering with the greatest excitement, but as his mouth kept on getting filled with water, nobody could understand what he was saying. "He'll blurt the whole thing out if we don't shut him up," cried Drinian. To prevent this, he rushed to the side and lowered a rope himself, shouting to the sailors, all right, back to your places. I hope I can heave a mouse up without help." And as Reepicheep began climbing up the rope, not very nimbly, because his wet fur made him heavy, Drinian leaned over and whispered to him, "Don't tell. Not a word." But when the dripping mouse had reached the deck, it turned out not to be at all interested in the sea people. "Sweet," he cheeped. "Sweet, sweet." "What are you talking about?" asked Drinian crossly. "And you needn't shake yourself all over me, either." "I tell you the water's sweet," said the mouse. "Sweet, fresh. It isn't salt." For a moment, no one quite took in the importance of this. But then Reepicheep once more repeated the old prophecy. Loafing Around says, "Boy, do I miss this good man." Well, Loafing Around, miss me no more. You found me. Welcome to the show. We're sailing beyond the edge of the world. Where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, there is the utter east. Then, at last, everyone understood. "Let me have a bucket myself, Rhinelf," said Drinian. It was handed him, and he lowered it, and up it came again. The water shone in it like glass. "Perhaps your majesty would like to taste it first," said Drinian to Caspian. The king took the bucket in both hands, raised it to his lips, sipped, then drank deeply and raised his head. His face was changed. Not only his eyes, but everything about him seemed to be brighter. "Yes," he said, "it is sweet. That's real water, that. I'm not sure that it isn't going to kill me, but it is the death I would have chosen, if I'd known about it till now." "What do you mean?" asked Edmund. It's like light more than anything else," said Caspian. "That is what it is," said Reepicheep. "Drinkable light. We must be very near the end of the world now." There was a moment's silence, and then Lucy knelt down on the deck and drank from the bucket. "It's the loveliest thing I've ever tasted," she said with a kind of gasp. "But oh, it's strong. We shan't need to eat anything now." And one by one, everybody on board drank. And for a long time, they were all silent. They felt almost too well and strong to bear it. And presently they began to notice another result. As I have said before, there had been too much light ever since they left the island of Ramandu. The sun too large, though not too hot. The sea too bright, the air too shining. Now the light grew no less. If anything, it increased. But they could bear it. They could look straight up at the sun without blinking. They could see more light than they had ever seen before. And the deck and the sail and their own faces and bodies became brighter and brighter, and every rope shone. And next morning, when the sun rose, now 5 or 6 times its old size, they stared hard into it and could see the very feathers of the birds that came flying from it. Here we can see our adventurous Pevensies, the scrub boy, Caspian, and Reepicheep, marveling at their newfound power to go Super Saiyan. Hardly a word was spoken on board all that day. Till about dinner time, no one wanted any dinner, the water was enough for them. Drinian said, I can't understand this. There is not a breath of wind. The sail hangs dead. The sea is as flat as a pond. And yet we drive on as fast as if there were a gale behind us. I've been thinking that too, said Caspian. We must be caught in some strong current. Said Edmund. That's not so nice if the world really has an edge, and we're getting near it. You mean, said Caspian, that we might be just, well, poured over it? Yes, yes, cried Reepicheep, clapping his paws together. That's how I've always imagined it. The world like a great round table, and the waters of all the oceans endlessly pouring over the edge. The ship will tip up, stand on her head. For one moment we shall see over the edge. And then down, down, the rush, the speed. Newsflash, guys, Reepicheep is a flat earther. They're turning into stars. Maybe, Mulric. And what do you think will be waiting for us at the bottom, eh? Said Drinian. Aslan's country, perhaps, said the mouse, its eyes shining. Or perhaps there isn't any bottom. Perhaps it goes down forever and ever. But whatever it is, won't it be worth anything just to have looked for one moment beyond the edge of the world? But look here, said Eustace. This is all rot. The world's round. I mean, like a ball, not like a table. Our world is, said Edmund. But is this? Do you mean to say, asked Caspian, that you three come from a round world, round like a ball, and you've never told me? It's really too bad of you, because we have fairy tales in which there are round worlds, and I have always loved them. I never believed there were any real ones, but I've always wished there were, and I've always longed to live in one. Oh, I'd give anything. I wonder why you can get into our world, and we can never get into yours. If only I had the chance. It must be exciting to live on a thing like a ball. Have you ever been to the parts where people walk about upside down? Edmund shook his head. And it isn't like that, he added. There's nothing particularly exciting about a round world when you're there. Whoa. And that's the end of chapter 15, rather abruptly. Whoo-wee! Well, oh my goodness, look, it's all dark and gloomy in here now. I had the ill fortune to knock my other lamp for lighting. So yeah, I guess that's the price for going on a little bit longer than normal on an overcast night. Well, we've got one more chapter left. We'll be back next Monday. It's bedtime. Yeah, the lighting quality says so. That's for darn sure. We'll be back on Monday with the final chapter of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and we will see if Reepicheep has his prophecy come true, if the Lord Roop and the other sleeping masters are able to be awakened, and if the daughter of Ramandu and Caspian hit it off, as I hope and suspect they just might do. This Long Chapters Thursday is awesome. Yeah, it's kind of nice to sort of settle into it for a little while. I agree. It's really nice. Maybe I'll consider doing something like, 3 shows a week, but they'll all be a little bit longer. I don't know. I kind of like the 4-day schedule, though. I'm open to suggestions, though. So if you've got strong feelings or inklings or suggestions, feel free to stick those in the suggestion box just down at the bottom of the page there. Marin Shea, love the company while animating. Yeah, absolutely. It's great. I'd like to think that I'm great background noise. Well, shucks, everybody. Thanks for being a pal. Thanks for being a friend. And thanks for being a fan. I hope you have a really great night's sleep. I hope you enjoyed the stories tonight. I know I certainly did. And I hope you'll join me once again next week for the thrilling conclusion, as conclusions can only be thrilling, to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So, sweet dreams, everybody. Good night, moon, and good night, stars. Good night, trucks, and good night, cars. Good night, shoes, and good night, hats. Good night, dogs, and good night, cats. Good night to friends and family. Good night to you, and good night to me. Sweet dreams, everybody.